Hello friends, welcome to the channel. Today we are talking about cars that you probably don't want to see in your garage. Chevrolet is a name that most people associate with reliability, power, and classicism. But even giants have their failures. This episode features 7 of the most unsuccessful, clumsy, and downright shameful cars that ever rolled off the Chevrolet assembly line. Some were so bad that even GM fans disowned them. So fasten your seatbelt, it will be rude, offensive in places, but honest. Let's go! Number 1. 1976 Chevrolet Chevet. What's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word Chevet? Legendary power? A roaring engine? A luxurious interior? Well, perhaps not. Friends, today we're going to look at a truly scandalous chapter in Chevrolet history, the 1960 model, the Chevrolet Chevet. You know, when you first see this car, it might seem like it's just old, like small, fuel-efficient, typical of the 70s. But no, it's much worse. The Chevet positioned itself as an economical miracle for American roads, saying, "Built to last, built to save." But let's be honest, this was General Motors' attempt to quickly fill a gap in the subcompact lineup when the Japanese were already dominating with the Toyota Corolla and Honda Civic. So, what do you suggest in response? A 1.4-liter engine that accelerates to 60 miles per hour in about 20 seconds, if it accelerates at all. Yes, the Chevet was cheap. Its base price in 1976 was about $2,899. But what were you paying for? Rattling plastic interior trim, handles that literally fell off in the first year, cardboard seats, and an engine sound that sounded more like a broken vacuum cleaner than a car. Reliability? Don't make me laugh. The Chevet was notorious for its transmission problems, especially with the automatic. The suspension? Stiff and rattly. The electrics had a life of their own. And at the same time, no style, no personality. It looked like it had been hastily sketched on a napkin in a coffee shop near GM's offices. But here's the interesting thing. Despite all this, the Chevet sold itself. Yes, seriously, millions. You know why? Because it was affordable, because gas was expensive, because people believed in the Chevrolet name. But the result? Disappointment. It's one of those cars that people still joke about on forums. If you had a Chevet, you were either a student or you were destined to be one. Today, the Chevet is a rare guest on the road, and not because it has become a collector's item, but because almost all of them have rotted, broken down, and been forgotten, as one of GM's most dubious shortcomings in competing with the Asian auto industry. And that's why the 1976 Chevrolet Chevet is on our list of the cheapest and most disgusting cars Chevrolet has ever made. Number 2. 1958 Chevrolet Delray. The year is 1958. America is experiencing an automotive boom. Highways are widening, engines are getting bigger, and cars are turning into works of art on wheels. And then along comes the Chevrolet Delray. It doesn't look like anything criminal. A typical representative of its time. Wide, low, with tails, with chrome, as if someone glued chewing gum foil to the body. But dig deeper, and you realize this is one of the most controversial cars that ever rolled off the Chevrolet assembly line. Let's start with the fact that Delray was originally a budget brand of Bel Air and Biscayne models. It was intended for those who did not have enough money for a full-fledged normal Chevy, but who wanted to somehow join the ranks of owners of large cars. Well, in the end, the buyer got a car that was skimped on everything possible. The interior, cheap vinyl. The dashboard, flat, boring, and dull. Even the radio was optional, not standard. And you sit down, turn the key, and hear this muffled roar of the 235 cubic meter 6-cylinder engine. Yes, of course, there were V8 versions, but most Delrays went to market with a 6 and a 3-speed manual without a synchronizer on the first. Have you ever tried to start uphill with such a box? Good luck. The handling is also a disaster. The Delray steers like a boat. There is no reaction. The brakes, drums, solid. That is no confidence in stopping on a wet road. It's just scary. But you know what's most annoying? Chevrolet called the Delray a modern people's car in its advertising brochures. And that sounds like a mockery, because this car was so bare that it literally had nothing. Even the anti-corrosion protection was purely symbolic. That's why most of the 1958 Delrays either rotted to pieces by the mid-60s or were cannibalized for Bair parts. As a result, the 1958 Delray is remembered today not with love but with bewilderment. It was a cheap, clumsy, confidential car even at the time of its release, which was bought not out of desire but out of desperation. To be honest, the 1958 Chevrolet Delray is an example of how a brand can ruin its own reputation by trying to make money on the mass segment, forgetting about quality. And that's why it absolutely deservedly makes it into our list of the most disgusting and unsuccessful cars that Chevrolet has ever created. The next car in our anti-rating is the kind of car that seems cool at first, but then you spend a day in it and feel like you've been ripped off. Meet the 1960 Chevrolet Kingswood. It looks like a solid station wagon, and in 1960, it seemed like an American family's dream. Lots of room, chrome everywhere, a rear end designed specifically to carry suitcases, kids, and dogs. But once you move from appearance to reality, the Kingswood shows its true colors. The first thing that catches your eye is the suspension. In 1960, Chevrolet was actively trying to promote its new X-frame platform, a frame in the shape of the letters X. And this is a terrible idea. Such designs reduce body rigidity, especially in turns, and do not require protection in a side impact. In fact, if someone cut you from the side, there was little chance. The car folded like a cardboard box. The second is the weight. This wagon pulled more than 2 tons. At the same time, the basic version came with a 3.9-liter 6-cylinder groggy that barely accelerated this colossus. You press the gas and feel how the Kingswood sighs heavily and begins to crawl forward, as if it doesn't enjoy it at all. Of course, there were V8s, but they did not save you from the feeling that you are dragging a brick along the asphalt. Now pay attention. Brakes. In those years, everything was on drums, without amplifiers. Hopelessness. The Kingswood slowed down like an old refrigerator on a sled. One, and you begin to plan a stop a block before the traffic light. The interior? Yes, it is large, but again, cheap plastic, fabric that wears out after a year, noise insulation was at the level of village minibuses. This is the family comfort of the 60s, they said. In reality, it's the engine hum, the squeal, and the heat from the heater that you can't regulate properly. But you know what really makes the Kingswood a failure? It's how quickly it got tired. After just 2 years, the model was discontinued. Sales were so weak that Chevrolet decided to just forget that it was a station wagon at all. And it's also hard to find even at auctions today because most of them have rusted to pieces or have been written off. This is a rare case where the rarity is not due to uniqueness, but because the cars simply didn't survive. So yes, the 1960 Chevrolet Kingswood is not just a failure, it's a family failure. A model that was full of hopes, but ended up with a series of compromises, shortcomings, and frankly, weak engineering. It looks like a big win, and in fact, it has become a symbol of why Chevrolet began to lose the attention of buyers in the station wagon segment in the 60s. The Kingswood is an unforgettable example. Not everything chrome is gold. Now let's talk about the car that Chevrolet intended to be the new hope of the 70s, but ended up being a nightmare for its owners. Meet the number 4, 1975 Chevrolet Monza. When you first hear the name Monza, you immediately associate it with Italy, racing, speed, excitement. Well, yes, Chevrolet was clearly hinting at this, but in reality, the Monza turned out to be more of an antipode of a racing car. Let's start with the simple, the platform. The Monza was built on the Chevrolet Vega base. This is already an alarm bell. The Vega was a real disaster in terms of safety, and everything that concerned the engine, cooling, body, and electronics, the Monza happily inherited. Only now all this was also served under the sauce of a sporty compact coupe. It is interesting that the Monza was initially designed for a Wankel rotary engine, like the Mazda. GM spent millions on improvements, but changed its mind at the last moment because the engine turned out to be unreliable and gluttonous. And so, suddenly, conventional engines had to be installed on the finished body, from Vega and later V8. Yes, even a 5-liter V8 was shoved into this light, cramped box. Imagine what it was like with cooling and balance. Never. The car was literally suffocating from the heat. Now, ergonomics. If you grow taller than 180, welcome to hell. The interior is so cramped that your knees rest against the steering wheel and the ceiling presses on your head. The trunk? Formally, it is there, but you can hardly fit a suitcase in there. Everything in this car was created not for observing life, but for a showcase. And most importantly, the Monza was literally rotting before our eyes. After only 3 or 4 years, the owner complained about through corrosion, arches, doors, hood. The coating was all rusty, even if the car was kept in a garage. GM, of course, swore that these were features of the climate. No, guys, these are features of terrible metalworking. Handling? Well, like a compact coupe, rear-wheel drive should be fun, right? No. The steering was sluggish, the suspension was too soft, and on the wet asphalt, the Monza slid like soap in a bathtub. Especially if you tried to show someone V8 under the hood. It looked more like a horse without a bridle than a sports car. And, by the way, about sportiness. Despite its racing appearance, the basic versions of the Monza accelerated to 100 in, well, 13 to 14 seconds. Yes, don't be surprised. You have a Camino on the outside, but under the hood, a fuel-efficient 4-cylinder breather that sounds like it's asking for help. Sure, the Monza had its fans, but mostly because of the design. And that's fair. The car was aggressive and stylish on the outside, but on the inside, it was a typical 70s GM product. Poorly assembled, quickly outdated, and completely unfulfilling. So the 1975 Chevrolet Monza is more marketing than a car. It's like a cheap energy drink with a Red Bull wrapper. You think you're getting a sports car, but what you're getting is a headache, an overheating engine, and rust as a gift. Now let's talk about a real legend of failure. Oh, the car that should have been the hero of the 70s, but instead joined the persistent, shameful pages of Chevrolet history. Yes, I'm talking about number 5, the 1971 Chevrolet Vega. When GM announced the Vega, expectations were high. It was supposed to be innovative, stylish, fuel-efficient, and, most importantly, affordable. Americans were tired of big cars and expensive expenses, and then Vega appeared on the horizon, a compact hero of a new era. On paper, everything looked cool. Aluminum engine, modern design, improved aerodynamics, lightweight body. But what happened in reality? In short, everything that went wrong. Let's start with the engine. Vega got an innovative 2.3-liter aluminum engine without a sleeve, and it was a disaster. Due to design flaws, the engine lost compression after 40,000 kilometers. The car literally ran out of oil. Owners added a liter of oil for every 1,000 miles, and this was considered normal. But it didn't end there. Engine cooling? Weak. The radiator couldn't cope with the climate cover, especially in the summer. The engine overheated, and due to different expansion coefficients, the aluminum deformed. The result was a major overhaul of the engine almost 50,000 kilometers after my wife's death. Now about the body. In the early 70s, GM sought to make production as cheap as possible. The result? The Vega was literally rotting before our eyes. Rust was eating away at the thresholds, arches, doors, hood, even the roof. A car that was only 3 years old already looked like a veteran with 20 years of experience in the northern states. It was a real disgrace. And how do you like the assembly? The cars were assembled at the new Lordstown plant, where GM introduced a new theme of fast-track production. Workers suffered from overload, and many of them deliberately messed up the assembly in protest. Cases when trash, wrenches, or even unfinished parts were found in the doors were common. Handling? Zero. The steering was spongy, the brakes were unreliable. The suspension reminded everyone at every pothole that comfort was not even supposed to be here. What's worse is that GM refused to acknowledge the problems. Owners literally lined up at dealers with smoking engines and rusty bodies. The company waved them off with phrases like, "This is normal for a new aluminum engine." In 1975, the Vega's reputation was destroyed. The car became a symbol of the failure of the American auto industry in the competitive struggle with the Japanese and Europeans. The irony is that the Vega was supposed to be the answer to the Toyota Corolla and Datsun, but instead, it became a school assembly of how not to make a car. Yes, it had a beautiful appearance. Yes, there were hopes. But the Vega justified nothing. Neither the technology, nor the promises, nor the trust of buyers. Today, years later, the 1971 Chevrolet Vega remains in the memory as one of the most modern cars not only of the brands, but of the entire American history of the auto industry. Now let's go back to the 60s, a time of great hopes and stylish cars. Chevrolet decided to combine two worlds, a car and a pickup truck. The idea? Tempting. But the execution? Well, let's say number 6. The 1960 El Camino was built in such a way that a good idea can turn into a failure if you cover it up later. When the first El Camino was released in 1959, it was bold, futuristic, and quite successful. But already in the next year, 1960, Chevrolet decided to streamline the project. They removed everything bold and unique. The futuristic design with vertical wings was replaced by a more conservative and boring one. It turned into another station wagon with a pickup body, losing its character. But the problem was not only in the design. The platform on which the 1960 El Camino was built was an ordinary Chevrolet Brookwood sedan. What does this mean? This means it wasn't a real pickup truck. The suspension couldn't handle serious loads. The bed would quickly start to walk if you tried to use it for its intended purpose, as a workhorse. The most annoying thing was that the El Camino looked like a pickup truck, but it didn't behave like a pickup truck at all. It was impossible to transport construction materials, equipment, or tools. The bed was small, flimsy, the rear suspension sagged after just a couple of bags of cement. Now let's talk about engines. Yes, on paper, it sounds cool. There were versions with both an inline-6 and a V8. But the base engine was weak and couldn't even pull the car itself, let alone the load. The car barely moved uphill, especially if you loaded anything into the bed. The V8 versions were faster, but they ate so much gas that they became pointless. They either didn't move or broke down. Build quality? To put it mildly, mediocre. Chevrolet rushed to release the model to get ahead of the alternative was never finished. After just a year, the interior creaked, rust appeared on the arches and sills almost from the factory. One owner complained that the body began to rot even before registering the car. In addition, the market simply did not understand why this hybrid was needed. Buyers of classic El Camino trucks and lovers of passenger cars, too bulky and clumsy. It ended up in the middle and no one needed it. It is not surprising that Chevrolet stopped production after just a year. El Camino disappeared from the market in 1961 to return later, already on a completely different platform. So it turns out, the 1960 Chevrolet El Camino was not just a failure. It was a failure with good intentions, but with terrible implementation. It seemed to be both a passenger car and a truck, but in fact, neither one nor the other. No reliability, no functionality, no comfort. And although El Camino and other generations became iconic, it was the 1960 model black place in history, and a well-deserved place in our anti-rating. Number 7. 1958 Chevrolet Bel Air. Now, let's fast forward to 1958. Chevrolet, eager to ride the wave of the post-war automobile boom, releases the new Bel Air. At first glance, it's stylish, chromed, as if it came straight from the cover of the American Dream. But dig deeper, and it becomes clear that the 1958 Bel Air is one of the most controversial cars in Chevrolet history. Why? Let me explain. First, the design. Yes, it stands out, but standing out does not always mean beautiful. Look at it. It's massive, overloaded with decorative elements. And the rear fins look like the designers couldn't decide whether they were making a flying saucer or a car. All this, more often than not, created a false sense of luxury, while under the hood and in the cabin was an ordinary, average car. A true embodiment of the principle, all for show, nothing in fact. And you know what the main problem was? The weight. The 1958 Bel Air was heavier than previous models, but the base engine was still weak. The simple six-cylinder engine couldn't handle such a body. The car drove slowly, acceleration was dismal, especially with the Powerglide automatic transmission. Fuel consumption was like a tank. Want a normal engine? Pay for a V8. And this already raised the price almost to the level of the Impala, which, by the way, had been a separate model since 1958. Yes, in 1958, the Impala first appeared as a luxury version of the Bel Air, and here Chevrolet screwed up. It turned out that the Bel Air instantly fell into the shadows. Everyone wanted the Impala because it looked better, was more powerful, and the interior was richer. The 1958 Bel Air, in the eyes of buyers, became simply second-rate, although not cheap. They tried to sell it as a prestigious middle-class car, but it turned out to be neither fish nor fowl. Now let's talk about control. The car behaved like a boat. Huge body, long wheelbase, soft. Suspension. Bel Air literally floated on the road. At speed, it seemed loose, the steering wheel was cottony, and the condition slow. Parking? Good luck. It was one of the first truly redesigned cars, when comfort and safety were sacrificed for style. And now about quality. 1958 was a year of rush and panic for Chevrolet. Sales across the country fell, the economy went into recession. Factories began to rush, assembly was lame, and Bel Air owners complained about creaky panels, poorly fitted elements, leaking seals. Some even joked, if you want to spend money and regret it, buy yourself a 1958 Bel Air. Chevrolet quickly realized their mistake. The next year, they completely redesigned the model, and the 1959 Bel Air was much better. But 1958 has gone down in history as a heavy chrome failure. Too pompous, too expensive, too bad. All of which makes the 1958 Chevrolet Bel Air a top contender on our list of the most modern and the most annoying car Chevrolet has ever made. It was a victim of the era, the desire to show off at any cost. And this valuable news disappointed thousands of buyers.